Hello guys, you're welcome once again to my channel, and in today's video we're going to be continuing from the last video I made, which is PHP Slim version 4 React Redux, basically this video here, and we are going to continue from where we stopped. And in today's video we are going to be building the React version, or basically the front end, which is going to be a React application to consume this API. So before I get into any further for this content, please, if you have not subscribed to my channel, please do well to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notifications bell whenever I create a new content. Okay, all right, so basically right here we have our API, and I've already started our server. In this video, let's get straight into the React version of this application, and I'm just going to get this up, and let's go into my React folder, and let me see, I think I have a YouTube folder here. So right in my YouTube folder, I'm going to create a new React application. And to create a new React application, I'm going to make use of npx. So basically, npx create React app, and I'm going to call this app PHP Slim, or basically let me just call this app guest entry book or something like that, right? And then I'm going to hit enter. All right, so our React application is basically creating right now. So what's going to happen is I'm going to pause this video, and then I'll come back once it is done. Okay, so that was really quick. I think it took like maybe 5 to 10 seconds, and after I paused the video, so that was pretty quick. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open that particular directory. So that is documents, React, React, YouTube, and guest entry book. So I'm going to open this right now, and I'm going to open this source. So let's just get the terminal, and then I'm going to have to say yarn start just to start our application. And this should kick off a server on port 3000. So on port 3000. Here we have our React application. The first thing I like to do is I like to install certain dependencies that we are going to need. So let's just head over to our package, the Json. So I'm going to make use of yarn. So yarn add like React Redux. So I'm going to say yarn add React router. And let me see if this is done installing. That's fast. So React router, we are also going to add React router DOM. So I'm also going to add React router, right? React router DOM and Redux DOM, because our middleware. And for our UI, we're going to use a semantic UI CSS, right? Semantic UI CSS and semantic UI React. So semantic UI CSS and semantic UI React, semantic UI CSS. So let's install those dependencies. And the last on the list is going to be, let me just open a new terminal so that can be really fast. It's going to be formic. So yarn add formic. All right, so that should do, right? Let me close this, don't save. So package the JSON, and all right, so we have all our dependencies perfectly set up. So now that we have all our dependencies perfectly set up, the first thing I'd like us to do is we're going to go into our app.js, and since we are using semantic UI CSS for our CSS styling, we're going to import that globally so that just works fine. So semantic UI CSS, semantic.main.css. And so the first thing I'm going to start off with is I'm going to start off by creating a new folder here, and I'm going to call this views. And within our views, I'm going to have a new folder here called layout. And within our layout, I'm going to have a new folder here that I'm going to call header. And in our layout also, I'm going to also have another new folder here, and we're going to call this footer. Okay. And then within our views, I'm going to have a new folder here that I'll call off. All right, so basically this will be responsible for our login modal. All right, so the modal you saw at the first video. So in here, I'm going to have a new directory called login modal. Within our header, I'm going to have a directory that I'm going to call components. All right, and within our components, I'm going to have a new file here that I'm going to call header.js. And in our header, I'm going to have a new file here. Oh, sorry, I'm actually supposed to have a new file here called header. And then let me rename this. This is supposed to be navbar, right? So this is going to be our navbar, and then this is going to be our header. Okay, so let's just do something. First, in our navbar, I'm going to have a functional component in here. Right within here, I'm going to make use of a class here, which is our UI and then our container. And in here, I'm going to make use of our menu component from our semantic UI for React. And this doesn't do an auto import, which is really surprising. So we're going to have to import this manually. So import this from semantic UI React. Okay. And within our menu, I'm going to have a div here. And this div is going to have a class name of let's header. Yep. And then item. So in here, I'm going to call this my guest book. All right. And then we are going to list out our menu items. So I'm going to use menu and then the item property here. Let's just close this. And in here, we're going to have the name. So basically the name here is going to be home. And we're going to have to set the active property. So what I want to do here is I'm going to make use of useState. So basically, useState in React is basically a way to manage states within our component. And for class-based components, you would use this.state. So basically, in functional components, useState has come to replace this.state in class-based components. So here, I'm going to have a new state here. I'm going to call this active. Let me call this active item. All right, and then set active. Sorry, item. And by default, all right, so the default state is going to be home, because by default, once our component loads, or basically once this application loads, the default page is going to be the home page. So we have set our active state. So what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to say active item would be equal to home. Okay. So this is only possible whenever there is a click event. So on click, and I'm going to have a function here called handle item, right? Handle item click, and handle item click is going to take 3 parameters. So the first is going to be our event, the second is going to be the name, and then the third is going to be the route. Okay, so basically this would go to create. All right, so I'm also going to then call this home. All right, so now we have our home. I'm going to copy this right now and paste that in here. And for the next one, it's going to be view. So basically to view all our guests entered. So I'm going to call this view all guests. And this is going to be view. And here is going to be right. Okay, so that's cool. So now let's just create our handle item click function here. So I'm going to call handle item click, and yep, we pass 3 parameters. First is going to be the event, the next is going to be the anchor tag, and then the last is going to be the redirect URL. Okay, right in here, I'm going to call our set active item basically. So basically, whenever the user clicks, we want to change whatever is the value of our use state in here. Basically, as I said, use state is simply a way of managing state within our component. So once you change the value of this use state from home to whatever value that this anchor tag contains, which is basically the second parameter here, so that will be basically active, that you're going to see like the active on that particular list or that particular link, something like that, sorry. So I'm going to call this anchor tag. So set active item. And then the last thing we want to do is, in order for us to be able to redirect to that URL, we are going to use of a custom hook from React Router called the use history hook. But basically, I want to create an instance of it first. And I want to use the const keyword basically. So use history. Yeah, finally, it did import that for me. So here, right here, we are then going to push to the redirect URL. So I'm going to say history.push. And then this is going to take us to the redirect URL. Okay, so I'm going to save this right now. And this is for our navbar component. And then I'm going to head over to our header component, and we're going to import our navbar component. So RFC. Okay, so RFC, and here we have our header component. And now we need to call our navbar component, but this wouldn't import. So let's import this by ourselves. So we're going to import from components and navbar, and this is going to be navbar, right? So if I click on this, yep, so that is the file. So I'm going to save this right now. And if we head over to the browser, you can see nothing has changed, and that is because we have not added this to our app.js. So let's just head back here. But before we add that to our app.js, there's something I like to do, which kind of I think is cool. If we have an index.js here, and basically we can then export this whole folder as we're basically just going to specify the root file that we want while exporting this whole folder. So why does it bring that bar for me? Sorry, that's because this is within components. So let me delete. All right, move to trash, and then within our header outside in here, let me create that index.js file. Basically, this index.js is going to serve as an entry point to this folder, and for this, our entry point is going to be our header. Let me save this right now. And why is this not picking? Because we're exporting header. Okay, let me see. I think I know why. So if I export default header, right? Header. And yep, okay, so that's it. Okay, so right now we have exported this. So whenever I want to access this, this index.js is going to serve as our entry point. So what we can then do next is we're going to create a new file called route. So basically this file is going to handle all our routes, and we are going to place the header in our route. So what I'm going to do is right within our source. Okay, so I'm going to have a new file here, and I'm going to call this routes.js refc, and export default route. And within our route, we are then going to call our header components here. So our header, and I don't know why this thing is not auto importing. Sorry, let's see, views, layout, and then header. Okay, so I'm going to save this, and if I click on this, it should lead me in here. So I'm going to head back into our route, and I'm going to import a couple of things in here that we will need. So we're going to make use of switch. So basically, the switch simply helps us to be able to navigate between components without having to display all the components all at once. So basically, if I clicked on home without the switch property, it is going to display home and all the other components that are in our application. But with the switch, it can be able to display one component at a time, then route, and then redirect. And all these are from React Router DOM. Okay, so right now let's just save this, and then we are going to have to import our routes into our app.js. And so right now let's just head over to our app.js. We are going to import our routes, and this is coming from routes. And I'm going to get rid of every single thing in here except for our div here, which is contain our class name of app. And I'm going to wrap this around browser router, and I have to import that main. So let's just import browser. Okay, so let us wrap browser router, and I want to place this inside of our browser router. So I'm also going to then call our routes. Please import that. Oh, finally. And right now you can see how this pretty looks. And yep, our browser is done refreshing, and you can see our home and then our view. Okay, so this moves to create, although we have not created the component, so nothing really happens. So my guess, okay, so let me change that right now. So let's just get back here, and in navbar, I'm going to change this to my guest Nook, my guest group. So right next, we are going to be creating the create guest components and view guest components that will be rendered by our navigation. So I'm going to head over into view here, and then I'm going to have a new directory called create guest, and then another new directory here called view guests, right? Okay. So in our create guest directory, I'd like to have an index.js. All right. I'd like to also have a new directory here for our components, and then I'd also want to have a new file here, which is going to be our create guest, which is basically going to be our entry point for this component. And here I'm going to have a functional component, and now let's just export default. Yep, export default create guest, and I'm going to use the h1 target to say this is the create guest view, and I'm going to save that right now. And this is not supposed to be a directory, so let me delete this. and this is supposed to be our index.js to help navigate us to our entry point. So here, and this is create guest, okay, and this is our view guest. So let's just do the same. Here I'm going to have an index.js, and then I'm going to have a new directory, which is going to be our component. And then here I'm going to have a new file called our view guest, right? The JS. And this is a functional component. Yep. And then in here, okay, so let's have a h1 tag here. And this is going to say this is our view guest content. So okay, so yep, I'm gonna save this right now, and I want to export view guest. Yes, export the default from view guest. So we have our view guest, we have our create guest. Now let's add this to our router. So let's go to our routes.js, and in our routes.js we need to make use of the switch. So just to help us switch between components, it's wrong. So we need to make use of the switch just to help us switch between components, as I've explained earlier in this video. And then I'm going to have our route here, and our first route is going to lead us to the root directory. But basically, since we want our root directory to be our index page, all right, we are going to force all redirects to our index page from our root directory. So I'm going to call our redirect, and the path name here is going to be create. So basically, whenever the user tries to enter, whenever the user tries to reach out to our root, it's automatically going to redirect our user to our index, right here. So our index, so our root is going to redirect the user to our create directory, or to our create a component. And here I'm going to have, let's see, this is going to be our create. So the component we want to render for our create is going to be our create guest. So yep, the next is going to be our view guest, is going to move us to our view guest. All right, so the next is going to be 404. So I don't think I'm going to be designing a 404 page. So basically, whenever the user enters any route that doesn't exist, we just want to redirect the user to our root directory, basically, which then means that if we are going to redirect the user to our root directory, all right, if we are going to redirect the user to our root directory, then what that means is it's going to be redirecting our user back to the create directory. So yep, let me just copy this up until here. If you just try to redirect to any part that doesn't exist, then it should take us to this part, and this part should take us to create, basically like that. Or let me just make it really easy for us. So this is going to redirect to create. If everything works fine, we should have no issues. So let me refresh that. And okay, first I noticed this is not redirecting. So first of all, let's just head back over to our navbar, component. In our navbar component, yes, so let's view guest, all right, and in our route /create/view guest, exact path. Okay, so exact path. Now let's save this, and now let's head over to our browser here, and you have this is a create guest view. And this is our view guest content, create view. Notice how our active class comes up with two. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to design our create guest form. So let me head back here, and within our component, we're going to have a new file here, and we're going to call this create guest form, and yeah, create guest form.js. So rafc or rafc. Okay, so this is our create guest form. Export default create guest form. I'm going to head straight over to designing our form. So basically, here, since this is it's not part of the component, basically this is a full component itself. We want to make use of the UI class, and then raised these are classes in semantic UI, container, and segments. Okay, so in here we want to have another div, and this div is going to have a class name, so UI. So in here we're going to have another class, another div again, and this is going to be its white center aligned and column. And then next up is we are going to have a h1 tag here. All right, and our h1 tag is going to say join, guest book. Okay, and then we'll have another div again, divs after divs after divs, and then we'll have classic. Okay, and we'll have another div again here with the class name of value. Responses appear here, and now let's just comment this out, and then let me cut this and place this at the top of this div here. Okay, so we'll have another div again, and this time around our div is going to have a text here that says guest. Then before we then have our form. So for our form, we're going to be making use of Formic. So Formic is basically a library that helps you with validation. So things like, say, on-change validation and all that cool stuff. So we're going to call Formic. Yes, why did this now? Okay. Oh, man. Sometimes I wonder why VS Code does this. Right? So import Formic, and this is from Formic. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take some time and just import some other things that I know will be used here. So our loader, and then this is from our semantic UI React, and then from Redux, which we haven't even set up. So I think after importing this, after designing our form, we're going to import that. So use dispatch and use selector from React Redux. So use dispatch basically helps with dispatching actions, and use selector helps us to be able to select certain states within our global states, all right, our global Redux states. Okay, so what I'm going to do after this is I'm going to continue designing this form. And as I said, we're going to be using Formic, so I'm going to call Formic here. And let me close this. Okay, so yeah, now the first thing that we need is we need a validation function to map to our validate, and then we need initial values. So the initial values that Formic would be working with. So we are going to call our fields. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to call our validation function here, up here. So const validation, and yep. So this. So what I like to do is I'm going to create a new directory here. I'm going to call this helpers, and within helpers, I'm going to create a new file here, and that file is going to be called hooks form input. A hooks form input is going to be a custom hook that will help us when we are handling our forms. All right. So it's basically going to make use of our use state. So this is going to come from React. All right. So yep. And then we're going to export this because we want to still be able to import our use form fields in our components. So this is going to take our initial state. So whatever is our initial state, whatever is the state values. And then basically what it's going to do is, let's first define fields. So set values, and then our use state, so that this is going to pass our initial state. All right. So yep, now right here, we are going to return first, we're going to return first the fields. So of course we're going to be returning the fields because we may want to say maybe manipulate certain things in the field. And the next is we are going to return our set values. And before now, I did not used to return our set values. Basically, I had this function here, all right, that I just returned that was going to handle the changes for us by passing an event like this. And then I was going to call our set values, and then our set values, the structuring and having our fields, and then passing the event ID to the map to the value of that field. So basically, once that function is triggered, we want it to get the ID and then map that to the value. So we didn't structure this properly. So yeah. So now that should go. Okay, so but recently I discovered that sometimes I still get to need these particular set values, or basically the function that helps you manipulate your state by default from useState. So I decided to pass it alongside the fields whenever I use this useFromField function. All right. So yep, this is it for our useFromField hooks, our custom hook. So I'm going to save this right now, and within our create guest form, I'm going to let's see. Let me call const. So the first is our fields, right? Then the next is our set fields, which is basically set values or whatever you want to call it, right? And then the last is going to be a function to handle change. Let's call it handle field change instead. That sounds better. So handle field change. And then this 3 is going to call our useFromFields. And this did not import it again. Okay, finally it did import it. So this is going to call our useFromFields. And then our useFromFields, the initial state, or the initial state that we're going to be passing here, is the name. So for this form, we need the name, we need the email. If you watch the last video where I did the API, you're going to see the name, the email, the comments, and then we also need the check value, so that if the checkbox is not checked, we would not submit this form. All right, so we need to set the check value to false. Okay, so right now we have set this up. So I'm gonna scroll down here, and yep, we've passed our fields and then our validation rules. So within our validation rule, and so for validation rules, I'm going to have a function here, or a variable here called errors, and then I'm going to say errors.name, and for errors.name, we're going to say if not fields.name. Okay, basically, let me see, fields.name is empty. So basically, fields.name is empty. We want to say name fields required. So name field, otherwise nothing. Okay, and this will be semicolon. And next up is going to be email, errors.email, and fields.email. Oh boy. Okay, fields.email. So first of all, for this, we are going to first of all check. Okay, first, yep. First, let's check if email is empty first. So if email is empty, all right. If email is empty, we want to say email field. Email field is required. All right. Else something that is just empty. Next up is for email too. So another error for email is we want to check based on a regular expression. So basically, a regular expression is going to check for A to Z and 0 to 9. A to Z and 0 to 9, and then a dot and an underscore, and then a percent, a plus, and a minus. And then after that, we want to also check that the next letter after this set of string is an @. And after the @, we also want to check if the next set of string is also A to Z 0 to 9, the dot, and then the dash. Right? Okay. So after this, we then also want to check if there is a dot. So basically, we're escaping to see if there is a dot after they say the first part, the second part, which is the @, the third part, which is the set of number strings or dots and dash character, and then the dot, and then after that, we're expecting it just to be an A to Z. It doesn't contain any number. We don't need a number. It's just like saying, say maybe desmond@gmail.com. So basically, the A to Z, we are not expecting a number after the dot, so .com. So the com should be a string, and it shouldn't be greater than 3 characters. So we're going to call 2. And then the $, and then the I. So we are going to use the test method, which tests regular expression in JavaScript. So we're going to test this on fields.email. All right, so fields.email, and yeah. So for this, if it meets, we're going to say invalid email. If it doesn't meet, invalid email address, right? So yep, invalid email address. But otherwise, if it meets, then we would show no error. So the last is going to be the comments. So I'm going to say errors.comment, and then fields.comment, comment. Right, fields dot comment is an empty string. Then I'm going to say here comment field is required. All right, so comment field is required. Otherwise, just return an empty string. Okay, so I'm going to save this right now, but before I do that, let me just return all our errors so that our formic can have errors to display to the user. Okay, so we have set that up for our validation, basically our validation rules and our initial values. Next up is we want to set the properties that we will be handling with formic, or basically the actions that formic will be handling for us. So the first is errors, so display errors. The next is if it is touched, we want to do something, and then handle blur. So yep, so those are the three things that we are going to check out for. So handle blur basically is a function, and so in here we are going to put our form right in here. So why do we have this error expression expected? All right, so here let's have a form, right? Yes, and that error disappears. So our form is going to have a class name of UI form left, right? Align column segment, and for the action we're just going to leave that as nothing. Method should be post, and the name should be form. Okay, so this is our form, and let me just close this. All right, and now right in our form we are going to set up our fields. So the first field here is going to be the name field, so we'll set up a div here, and then this div is going to have a class name of field, and our field is going to have a label. Yes, and this label is going to be full name. All right, so full name, and we are going to have an input here. Our input is going to have a couple of properties. First, for the name, we are just going to settle for a text field, a basic text field, and then the values is going to be the field name, and basically we didn't call ours fields, actually fields, right? Yes, so fields name, and then we want to be able to get the value every single time there's a change event, and that's why we created our custom hook. So this is going to be our handle field change. So basically what this is doing is it's just going to get the ID and then map the ID to the value. So once there's a change, that's why this function is called. So that function does that for us. All right, so the next parameter we're going to pass here is on blur. So basically on blur, we want to call our handle blur. So this displays the error message if any errors are present. And for our name, this is the name, of course. We are going to set the ID. Then let's just add a placeholder here, and this placeholder is going to call. Okay, so this is basically the name field. The next is going to be the email field. And so for our email field, I'm going to basically copy this, right? Copy this, and then let me paste this here. And this is going to be, it's going to be email. Yes, and this is going to be type fields dot email, handle blur, name is email, and this ID is email, and then this is going to be email address. Okay, so before I continue, I actually forgot to display the errors from formic. So to display the errors from formic, all we just need to do is, remember we passed errors here. And this error is basically the errors coming from this validation function, because we have specified that we want to have our own custom validation function here. So here I'm going to say errors, right, dot name, and not just that, but this should happen whenever name is touched, and we want to display errors dot name. All right. And we're also going to do the same thing too for email. So I'm going to copy this right here and paste this in here. So this is going to be email, this is going to be email, and then this is going to be email. And then after the email, the next field is going to be the comment. So I'm going to just copy this right now, and comment is going to be a text area actually. and not just a regular text input field. So we are going to get rid of this, and let's change this to our label is going to be comments, or comments basically. And then we are going to have a text area, right? And our text area is going to have a name, and the name is going to be comment. Then we want the value, and the value is going to be fields.comment. Then when there's a change event, and for the change event, we want to call a handle field change, which just basically maps the value of our input to our comment state. And then on blur to this to handle our error messages, handle blur. And then our ID, which is our comment. Let me actually change this to comments for our errors. So touch comments, and then errors, comments. Okay, so I'm going to save this right now, and then the last field we're going to handle is going to be the checkbox. So basically the check value, and for that, let's see. Let me copy this too, and then let's paste this in here. And yep, we're going to leave this field here, but we are going to get rid of this label as we don't need the label. And we are also going to get rid of these errors for now. So we're going to have this div. And in this div, because we are dealing with a checkbox, we're going to add another div here to have a checkbox styling from semantic UI, and then have our input, checkbox input. So type is going to be checkbox, and then on change we are going to call a function here which is on check value, which we have not yet created. So basically on check value is going to help us handling our checkbox. So here I'm going to call agree, and the ID is going to be, and then I'm going to set a tab index here of 0, and then another property which is the class name, and I'm going to give it a hidden class name property. And yep, we've already closed this, so I'm not going to close this again. So we are then going to have our label, and this label is going to be for, so let's use HTML. So for this label is going to be for agree here. So I agree to the terms, all right, and condition. And right after this, we want to have our button that is going to be responsible for submitting. So I'm going to have a text here that says submit, and the type of this is going to be submit. Class name, so we want UI. Okay, so basically to add the styling to it. And then we want to disable this button. So we've not yet created the disable props yet, but I'm just going to add that there because we are still going to create that just right now. Okay, so basically we have the type, we have the class name, we have not title, all right, type, the class name, and then the disable. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create this disable props here. So I'm going to scroll to the top, and right here I'm going to say disable, right, and then set disable, which is going to be the function that will set that value. And then initially we are going to set this to false. Okay, and now that should do for our form. So I'm going to save this right now, and then I'm going to head over to our create guest, and then I'm going to get rid of this h1 here, and I'm going to call our create form. So this wouldn't import that, so let's just import create guest form from component, and then create guest form, and then let's call this here. So just to be sure that that's what we are calling. Okay, so I'm going to head back to our browser, and our browser has yet to update this, so let me refresh this. So I have an error saying on check value is not defined, and that is because we created a function here called on check value, but we did not basically for our here. So let's just fix that right now. And so since that is going to be manipulating our checkbox, the value of our checkbox, so what we are going to do is I'm going to say if, so basically if the event target is checked, all right, So if it's checked, which is as true, which is still the same as this. So if it's checked, then I want to call set values. So not set values, sorry, I think I called it set fields. And I'm going to destructure our fields, and then I'm going to call check value, and then I want to set the property of check value to be true. So basically, if it is checked, it means that checked is true. Else, I'm going to call set fields, and then I'm going to set the fields property here to check value as false. All right, so yep, now that error should no longer appear. Okay, so here we have our form. Our form looks really small. So let me get rid of the statistics and then see how that looks. So okay, yeah, so you can see now that it looks really nice. Okay, so let me refresh that to be sure. So yeah, it looks really nice. And the next thing I want to do is our formic error message. I like to style our formic error message a little bit better so that it just looks, like a lot cooler than it currently is. All right, so what I'm going to do is let's see. I think I did give them class names, did I, or did I not give them class names? Okay, so I didn't give them any class name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give them class names here. So this class name, and I'm going to call this error form response. All right, the error form response, and let me copy this class name across every single error message here. Oh boy, I didn't copy that properly. Okay, so let me copy that and scroll down, and I'll paste that here. So error underscore form underscore response, error form response, and okay, we don't need that in here. So error form response is the name. So I'm going to save that right now, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new file here, and I'm going to call this style.css. So now if I save this, so let's just head over to our create guest.js, and then let's import, save that, and now let's head back here. So now our page is loaded. Now if I try this, yes, you can see name field is required. This too, this works, okay. We shouldn't be able to submit this, right? Why are we able to submit this? Okay, yeah, but I think I'm supposed to have set the disabled props true and not false. So let's just get back to our create form, and let's just change the disabled props to true instead of false. So this is supposed to be disabled, right? It's disabled. So save that right now. And yes, so that's disabled. Yes, that's disabled. All right, guys, so the next thing we are going to head straight to is we're going to see how we can basically submit this form and let it post the data down to our database. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is let's head back over to our React application, and right in here we're going to head over to our form, and in our form we are going to add an onSubmit function here, and on submit we're going to have a function here called create. Let's call this create new guest. Okay, so we're going to create that function here. So yes, let's just create const create new guest. Okay, so to create a new guest, first of all, we have to also consider the fact that we are going to be using a Redux action to dispatch an event, and then the event is going to change a state, and then we will have a use effect function, get the value of that state, and then when there's a change in the value of the state, the use effect function is going to display different responses based on the dispatched event. Okay, so if you didn't get what I just said right now, not to worry. As we get through this video, you're absolutely going to understand every single thing that I just said. Okay, so before I even get into this function, what I like to do is I want to set up our Redux store in our application. So right within our root, I'm going to have a new file here. So I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this create store.js. And our create store.js is going to make use of our create store from Redux, as well as our apply middleware. So our apply middleware is going to help us glue our Redux state with our Redux tongue middleware. So we are also going to import tongue, all right, from Redux tongue. And then we are going to import HTTP interceptor, of which we have not yet created. And then the last is going to be a root reducer. So yep, we're going to set some of these things up. So our root reducer is going to come from a folder which we have not yet created, and that is going to be called our store, and then another folder in our store which is our reducers, and then our root reducer. Okay, so we are going to then export our middleware, right? Our middlewares, which is going to be our tongue middleware, basically our tongue glue, and then we want to create our store with middleware. So create our store with middleware, so basically with our tongue glue. So and we are then going to call our apply middleware. So basically apply middleware is going to take our tongue, which is our middleware here, basically our tongue middleware, and then is going to pass it to our create store function. Okay, so the last, not the last, the second to the last thing we want to do in this file is that we want to set that to be our store. So our create store middleware, which is going to pass our root reducer, our create store with middleware, which is going to pass our root reducer. Okay, so why am I having this error? That's because I didn't declare this. Okay, so after we have done this, we want to pass this to our HTTP interceptor, so that from our HTTP interceptor, we can basically have access to the store and then trigger an action that could display a particular response at every single point in time in our application, so that there can be consistency in our application. So I'm going to start off first by creating our HTTP interceptor.js. And our HTTP interceptor is going to make use of fetch intercept, and our fetch intercept from fetch intercept. Okay. Right next, we are then going to export our HTTP interceptor. And remember, we are passing our store into our HTTP interceptor, and then we can call our fetch intercept, which helps in intercepting fetch request done with fetch API basically. So register, and now within our register, we're going to set there are three main things basically within register. So the first is the request, and then this is where you define things like, say, your header and all that stuff. All right. So for this, I like to just leave this blank. I don't really like to do anything in here. So because I'm already setting the headers within my application. So what I'll just do is let me just return URL and the config, but I'm not really going to do anything beyond that. Then the next is the request error. And then I'm going to log error here. Okay, and then I'm going to return a promise. So let's just reject this error. And then the last one, which is probably the most important for us for this video, is the response. So for the response, for now, I'm not really going to do much. I'm just going to console.log our response.status. So this is going to get our response.status. Then I'm going to check to see. So basically, if response.status is 401, so it's the 401 status, then we want to do something. So for now, I'm not going to dispatch any events. I'll just log console.log. You can go on to set other things like 500 and all that stuff. So I'm just going to console.log. This is a 401 error. Okay, and then we want to return our response here. Okay, so basically after our response, the next is going to be response error. All right. So while this would help us handle custom response, this would handle responses that we don't have control over. All right. So here I'm going to call response, and in our response, I'm going to say, let's just console.log it. All right, response, and here I'm going to return the response. Okay, so our HTTP interceptor is set. Just to be sure, if I head over to our create store, yes, I think our HTTP interceptor is present, right? Does it locate it? No, it can't. So that means that we are doing something wrong here. So let me click here, HTTP, let me copy this now, HTTP intercept. Yep, HTTP interceptor, save that, and it still cannot find this. So let me see, I think there might probably be an issue here. So HTTP interceptor, and here, HTTP interceptor. Okay, yes, so now that fixes that. Let's see. Okay, so that's fine. All right, so after we created the HTTP interceptor, we are also going to create our root reducer, which exists in our store reducers. So for now, we don't have any store, so let's create our store. So here, I'm going to have a new folder called store, and within store, we're going to have reducers. Then we are also going to have actions, and in our reducer, I'm going to have a new file here called reducer.js. And within our root reducer, I'm going to call our combine reducer. So basically, our combine reducer combines all the reducers and returns them as a single reducer to our store. So this is going to come from Redux, sorry. So our combine reducer from Redux. And then we are going to have our root reducer, and this is our combine reducer. And yes, we are then going to export default root reducer. All right, and by default, if we keep this way, React will definitely throw an error saying that we don't have a reducer that exists in our combined reducer. So in order to avoid that error, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new reducer here, and I'm going to call this new reducer guest entry reducer. Okay, and in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have our initial state. So our initial state is going to have a couple of values here. So let's just call get guest, so all guests. Then we also want to get guest, which is signifying a single guest. Then we are also going to have create guest, all right, which is to create guest, and then update guest, which is to update the guest, and not guest, all right, and then count state. So basically, this is to count the values, all right. So here we are then going to call our guest entry reducer, which is the name of the file, and this is going to take the value of our state, and that is going to be our init state, and then our action. And we are going to make use of the switch statements here to just have the type of action, and then we can then know what we would render. Okay, so for now we are going to keep this really clean, no action for now, and then let's just come down here and export default guest entry reducer. Okay, so now we have created a guest entry reducer. So we are going to get back into our root reducer, and then in our root reducer, we are going to call our guest entry reducer, but first assign that to a value, and then let's call our guest entry reducer. Yes. Okay, so right now, I think React will no longer throw that exception again. So I'm going to go back to our create store, and we have created our HTTP interceptor and our root reducer, and everything is fine. So let's just save this right now. And if we head over to our browser, yep, we have no error messages. So if I refresh this now, there are no error messages. Okay, so right now that we have successfully set up our React store, what we are going to do is, in order for our components, in order for our application to be able to have access to our React store, we need to find a way to pass it into our component, into our application itself, all right? Because right now we have declared our reducers, we have declared our states, but they have not been passed into our component, they have not been passed into our application. So in order for us to be able to pass it into our application, we're going to make use of a component, which is called the provider component, and we are going to make use of the provider component within our index.js. So let's just head to our index.js. Okay, don't worry, we have a lot of index.js here. So I'm going to scroll down here now, and here we have our index.js. And right in our index.js within our React DOM.render, I'm going to get rid of this React strict. React strict, and then we are going to wrap our provider around our app. Okay, yes, and let's just add a comment here to fix that. Okay, so our provider is going to take our store. Let's pass our store, but we have to import both of them since I still don't understand why this is behaving this way. So our provider is from React Redux, and then our store is from our create store, which we did export our store. So this is coming from create store. All right, so now that we have successfully been able to pass our store into our provider, we can absolutely make use of Redux within our application, within the application context. Okay, so I'm going to save this right now. And here we have an error saying can't resolve fetch intercept in our source HTTP interceptor. So what we are going to do right now is we are going to go into our store, right? And okay, HTTP interceptor, and it can't resolve fetch intercept. So I'm going to go over to, let's see, package.json, and we did not import fetch intercept. All right, so let's just quickly import that right now. So I'm going to just bring up my terminal. All right, and here I'm going to say add fetch intercept. I would expect not to see any errors, so let's just head straight. All right, so fetch intercept, and cannot find module fetch intercept. Why? Okay, yes, so that is done now. And we have another error saying reducer gets entry return undefined during initialization. The state pass to the reducer is undefined. You must explicitly return the initial state. Okay, yeah, that's true. To fix that, let's just get back in here. And to fix that error, what we are going to do is we're going to return our init state since we have no actions within our state. And I'm going to save that right now. And just head over to our browser, and yep, you can see that the changes have automatically reflected here. Okay, so the next thing we are going to do is we're going to set up our action types. So I like to create action types because it kind of keeps things really clean for me, and you know, it also helps in reducing typos, like mistakes or typos. So I'm going to call this a guest entry, and then here we're going to have a const of create guest loading, and yep, this is going to be loading. And then we are going to have clear, right? Clear guest, sorry, clear create guest, not just clear, create guest state. And then this is going to be clear create, right? Guest state. And here, let's just put our constant. And I think I know exactly, just to make this a little bit faster. Let's just copy that way. Okay, so next is we're going to have create guest code error just for error handling. Code error. And then I'm going to copy this right now. And I don't know why I'm always forgetting to put my constants here. Okay, create guest code error. And then for successful response, we are going to have our create guest success. All right, so let's copy this, create guest success. And then next up is we're going to have our create guest error. And this is going to be create guest, oh, not error, actually it's supposed to be failed, because it's not like it's actually an error. It's just that we expected the response, but it returned false, so it is failed. So you just definitely understand what I'm doing when you see how I consume the APIs and I dispatch actions and then manipulate the reducers and all that stuff. Okay, so this is going to be just this for creating of guest. I'm going to save this right now. And then what I'm going to do is right within our reducer, we're going to do a couple of things in here for our create guest. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to have a couple of cases within our switch. So our first case is going to be for our clear create guest. All right. Okay. So here we are going to return our destructured state and then the value of our create guest. and this is going to be an empty string for this. And then we have another case again, here, and this is going to be create guest loading. And then here we'll have a return, and then we'll destructure the state too, and then we'll manipulate the value of create guest, right? And here we want the value to say loading because it is loading, all right? And then we are going to have another case here too, and this case is going to be for our create guest success, and we're going to do the same thing basically. So let me copy this right now, paste that here. So for success, our response is not going to be any of this. It's actually going to be our action.rest, which is our actions response. So this is for, sorry, no commas. So this is for our create guest success. So our create guest failed. We are going to return the structured state, and then here we'll call our create guest, and in our create guest we're going to still call our action.response. As I said earlier, the difference between the success and the failed is just basically because success always has a success value of true and failed has a success value of false. So that's just the only difference. And create guest code error, and then we're going to return the destructured value of the state and the value of our create guest, and here we just have like an error, failed to create guest. The last thing we're going to do here is we are going to set a default value, so something that it falls back to. It doesn't meet any of this, so it should just return the value of the state. Okay, so I'm going to save this, and now we are going to head over to our actions, and we're going to have a new file here, and this is going to be called our guest entry actions. But before we actually head into creating any actions, remember that we are basically going to be consuming endpoints, all right? And I really don't like to make my API calls within my actions, so I like to abstract things a little bit by having sort of like, say, services. So services consume the APIs, and then since I'm using fetch, right? Fetch usually has two layers, all right? The first .then, which is a promise. The first promise returns the status and the headers and all that. Then the second promise returns the data. So after the second promise, right? After the first promise, I return whatever is from the fetch, and then in my actions, I consume it, which gives me the second promise, which is the value. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to have a new directory in our source here, and I'm going to call this directory services, or let me just have them all in small services. And within our service, I like to have a root HTTP service, and this root HTTP service is going to serve us a whole great deal. So for HTTP service, you could do it however you want. Right now, I'm just going to use a class for this. So this is a class, all right? And then we are going to set a URL. So our URL is going to be our base URL, and then our base URL would be accessing 888, which is the port for our API. And then within our class, I'm going to have a couple of functions. So the first is going to be our post data, and our post data is going to take a couple of parameters, all right? Of course, it's an asynchronous function. So we have items, the added URL, which is going to be the URL that will be padded to the base URL. So let me just change this to base, right? The URL. And then the post type. So basically, since we're using post data, remember that we can perform put request, post request, and patch request. And then for the token ID, I'm just going to set it to initially the value should be an empty string. That way, even if we don't pass any value as a token ID, our post data function would still work. Okay, so I'm going to have our token, and for now we are using local storage. You could use cookie storage if you want to. So I'm going to call local storage, and this is going to get item. So for our local storage.get item, I'm going to call token ID. So basically, if token ID is empty, of course, then local storage would return null. Then I'm going to have another variable here called request options. And our request options is going to call a function we have not created yet, and this is going to be a post request options. And our post request options is going to take our token, take our item, right, item, and then the last is going to be the post type, right? So let's just pass that properly, the post type. Okay, so our post data is going to return a fetch request, basically fetch API, and then we want to call our base URL, and now we are going to append our base URL with our added URL. And after that, the next is going to be our request option, which is part of the parameters that you pass to fetch. And then we're going to call the then, because this is a promise. And remember, as I said earlier on, that fetch, while using fetch API, it has like two layers. The first returns the header parameters, and then the second returns the data that we are going to make use of. So basically, after this first the then, I'm going to call our response, which is going to be our JSON response. And now this here is going to return just the header. So whenever we call this post data function, because it's still a promise, so we're still going to call another then to get the value itself from this post data function. Okay, we're going to also have another function here, which I'm going to call get data. And yep, this is also going to be an asynchronous function. And we'll call added URL, and the token ID, which is for now is going to be an empty string. And then in here we're going to get our token. So since we're using local storage for this video, so local storage get item, and then we'll call the token ID, and then our request options, our request options, and yep, we are still going to create that function too, which is get request options, same as we are also going to create our post request options function. Okay, and then we are then going to return fetch, and we'll pass the base URL, then we add added URL, and then of course this is it, the then we have our response, which is our response to JSON. All right, so I'm going to save this right now, and then next up is I'm going to create the post request option function and the get request option function. And so let's begin with the post request option function. So post request options, and our post request option function, as you can see here, takes our token, our item, which is basically the data that we are going to pass as parameters, and then the post type. So basically, if it's a post, if it's a put, or if it is a patch request. Okay, and then here I'm going to declare our request options. All right, so our request options, and then our request options would have our method, which is going to be not methods, right? Just method, which is going to be our post type. Then would have cache. Of course, we don't want this to cache at any point, just to avoid certain kinds of problems. Then for the headers, not headers, right? So for the headers, we are, because we are dealing with authentication and we are using JWT, so I'm going to set our authorization, and here we'll have our bearer, and then we'll concatenate our token, and then we are going to set our content type. So our content type is going to be application /JSON, and then the last is going to be our body, and our body is going to be JSON stringified. Okay, so we'll just pass the item. All right, so this should do for our post request options. The last thing I want to do is that we want to return our request options here. Okay, so the next is we're going to create our get request options. So here I'm going to call get request options, and we'll pass our token for our get request options, and that is just about all we will pass for get request. So here we just declare our request option. So what I'm going to do is, let me just copy this right now, and then I'll paste this in here. So yep, we're just going to remove a couple of things from here, which is going to be our body, because we don't have a need for a body here. And that should be it. Method should be get, actually. So method is get, since it's a get request. And yep, we are going to save this right now. And then there's one more thing which I think is going to be very important, is our delete request function here. So we're going to have a function here, and I'm going to call this delete data, and this is going to be an asynchronous function. So we'll pass the added URL and the token ID too, and here we also want to token, which should be our local storage, right? Get item, and then we'll pass the token ID. Yep. And then we are going to have our request options. Okay, so because our delete request is neither a post request type nor a get request type. It's not a put, it's actually a delete request. So we are going to create a separate delete request option, and then we'll pass our token in here. So we're going to create our delete request option. So here I'm going to return a fetch API, and then this is going to be our base URL, and then we are going to pass our added URL. And sorry, we need to actually pass our request options here. Then this is a promise, so we have our .then, and right here we can then have our response, which is going to be our response JSON. Okay, so this is our delete request, delete data, and then I'm going to have our delete request options here. So our delete request options is quite similar to our get and our post request options, particularly our get request options. So I'm just going to copy this right now, and then I'm going to paste that in here. And for delete request, the only thing we are just going to change here is this. So basically, the method is going to be delete. So I'm going to save this right now, and then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to create a new service here, basically a new file here, and I'm going to call this CRUD service, right? CRUD service.js. And this CRUD service is going to be responsible for consuming our APIs for our create guest, get guest, and all that stuff. But before we actually get onto this, let's just go back to our guest entry form. Our create guest form, right? And right in our create get form here, you remember that we did create this function here called create new guest. So basically, our create new guest function is going to consume our create guest entry function and our create guest entry, our create guest entry service, which is basically what would consume our API. But then this will be dispatched from an action, all right? So we're going to create an action that's going to dispatch an event, or basically an action that we can call in here that will dispatch an action type, and then the action type will trigger our API call. Okay, so let me just get straight into things. So now let's just get back into our CRUD service. Yes, our CRUD service, all right? And right in our CRUD service here, I'm going to have a create guest entry function, and our create guest entry function is going to have it's going to take our credentials here. So basically it's going to take our credentials. Then I'm going to call our HTTP service, and this did not import this for us. So let's just import it by ourselves. So I'm going to import HTTP service from HTTP service. All right. So now what I'm going to do here is let's add the URL. So the added URL that we're going to add here is going to be our create guest, right? And the reason it's going to be our create guest is because right here, if you remember, this was what we called it here. So it's going to be our create guest. We are then going to say HTTP post data. Sorry. So we're calling the post data function. And why is this not calling? Because we have failed to export this class. Yep. So if I forget, let's just export, right? Default HTTP service. Yep. All right, so if I get back in here now, and then I click this here, okay, we'll call http.postData, and if you can look up here, you can see this is an anonymous function that takes item, which is actually our data that we're going to be passing, added URL, which is the URL we're adding to our base URL, then the post type and token ID, which is optional. This is TypeScript, so it's optional, which is a string, and it actually returns a promise. All right, so here we are going to call the credentials as the first parameter. The next parameter is going to be the added URL as the second parameter. And the third parameter is the type. This is a post type because we actually create. And then for the token type, all right, in order for any user to be created, he has to be authenticated. So we'll have to set a value for our JWT token. And so for the token ID, what I'm going to pass here for the token ID, we're going to call this, let's just call this CRUD app, right? And then remember I said here we have a first dot then, and then the first dot then returns a promise. It basically just returns the headers. So the second then is where we get the data. So I'm going to call another then because it's a promise. And then for this second then, we're going to pass the data here. And in here, we are going to return the data, which is the data that we will need. And then we're going to catch, basically, if there are any errors here. We are also going to, we'll first of all have to log the error. So console.log the error, all right? And then we'll have to return the error. All right, so that should do now. We have our create guest entry, and I might want to add, let me just leave it this way. So we have our create guest entry function, So what we're going to do next is we're going to create an action. So the action is going to make use of our create guest entry function, and it's going to dispatch an action type of create guest, basically all this. So whenever there's a success, which means that we got the data successfully, and then you can pass it down to our reducer. All right, so within our store, all right, within our store here, within our actions, we have our create guest entry action here, which we created. And right in here, we are going to then make use of our create guest and guest and sorry, what's the name of the function? Sorry, it's called our create guest entry service. Okay, so in here, I'm going to say export const create guest uh, entry, sorry, action. And then here we're going to pass our credentials. Okay, and then we can return a dispatch. And our dispatch initially we're going to dispatch a type. So basically, initially we want to clear whatever value has been stored in our create guest. Okay, so we want to clear whatever value has been stored in our create guest. And if I move over to our guest entry reducer, you can see here that for our clear create guest, you can see that we're entirely setting the value of our create guest to an empty string, or basically setting it to whatever was the value, as in whatever was set the value on the initial state. All right. So yep, at the initial state, yes, that's the first thing that we want to do. And after we have done that, the next thing we want to do is we want to set the value to loading. So we are going to dispatch, and here we would have create guest loading. All right, so our create guest loading, and then after we have dispatched this, we'll now call our create guest entry service. So basically, while the value is still showing loading, then we will now call our create guest entry service here, and then we pass the credentials which we have. Then we can call it then on this, because this also returns a promise, and then we'll get the response. And then right in here, we are then going to check to see, say, if, right, if response dot it has a property, so has on property of success. So has on property is a function that you can call on objects in JavaScript to check whether an object has a particular property type. So if it does, and then the property type of success has a value of true. So basically what this means is everything went successfully. And then we can then dispatch create guest success. And then for our create guest success, we're going to pass our response here. Okay. And after this, right here, we can then say else if, all right, so else if it wasn't successful. So basically, if it has its own property of success, all right, but the response success is false, which means that it failed, or for some reason it wasn't successful as we expected. And then what we are going to then do here is we're going to dispatch um, another type here, which is create guest field. Oh, sorry, our create guest field is what we're going to dispatch here. So create guest field, and then of course we're also still going to pass our response. And yeah, we're still going to pass our response. But I think we failed to, since it's an object. All right. Okay, so the last thing we are then going to do here is to check out for our errors. So right here, we are then going to check out for our errors. So basically, if there are any errors, then we want to first log the error. All right. So basically, if what is returned here from our create, not our here, our CRUD service here is this, right? It's an error. Then we don't just want to log that to the console, we also want to dispatch an error event here. So we are going to call a type here of create guest code error, and then we're going to pass that error. All right, so for now we have our create guest action created. We have our create guest service also created, and then we have our guest entry reducer also perfectly created. All right, so what we're going to do next is we're going to head back to our create guest form, right? And then in our create guest form in here, we're going to first of all we're going to prevent browser default behavior. So e.prevent default, and then I'm going to next of console.log the fields. All right, and I'm going to refresh this now. And let's see, I have some comments, and I check this, but you can see that the submit button is still disabled. So what we're going to do now is we want to check to see if all the fields are not empty and are valid, and then as well as also our checkbox button being checked. All right. So what we're going to do now here is we are going to head over to our unchecked value function. And in our unchecked value function here, whenever the checkbox is checked, we want to set fields. All right. Not just that we are going to set fields, we are also going to check if form. All right. So I'm going to create a new function here. Say check if form fields is filled properly, and this would pass the fields. All right. So in here, I'm going to have a function here saying, let me just copy this right now. So check if form field is filled properly, and here we're going to have form fields, and then here we are then going to use a for loop. So we're going to use a for in loop because basically we want to be able to look through all the objects because our field input is actually an object. So for all objects, yes, for all objects in form fields, all right. So for all objects in form fields, then we're going to check if form fields of objects, right? So basically, if any of the fields are empty or form fields objects is null, so if any of them is empty or any of them is null, return set our set disabled function here, which is as true. We're just going to set disabled as true. So basically, the button still remains disabled. All right. So, but if it bypasses this, right? So if it bypasses this, and then every single thing goes well, which means that none of the form fields are empty and none of them is null, then we want to return our set disabled as false. Okay, so I'm going to save this right now. And objects, okay, yes. So we're going to head back to our browser now. And right in here, I'm just going to refresh this again. So right now you can see our button is disabled. All right, so now let's just get a couple of data in here. And if I check this, our button is still disabled. So let's just quickly fix that now. And I think this might be because we are checking for the form fields. And at the point of checking this checkbox, right, since our fields are synchronous before the check value gets through, this function is already called. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do this, all right? So I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to say, and object is not check value. So object is, so if form fields object is empty, blah, 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 object is not check value. Then what we can also do here is, here we can call set disabled as true. Okay, so whenever he unchecks this, we want to disable that button. So I'm going to save this right now, and then let's head over to the browser. And now let's try this again. So if I check this here, we have our button. Uncheck this, disable, check this here, have our button. If I get rid of this, and then right, you can see our comment field is required. But we still have a little issue here because if I check this, right, and then I get rid of this, you can see our button is not disabled. So we would need to fix this. So what I'm going to do now is let's just head back in here. And so to fix this, what we're going to do is we're going to make use of a use effect. All right. So basically, what I'm going to do is right. Let's do it very close to this. Very close to. Yep. Okay. So in here, I'm going to use a use effect. All right. So the reason I'm going to use a use effect is because since the field's value or the use state value is somewhat asynchronous, so we can use effect to basically monitor whenever there's a change in the value of the field, and then we can set it. All right. So in here, I'm going to call our fields. All right. And then I'm going to then in here, I'm going to then call our check if form fields is filled properly. And then I'm going to pass our form fields. Not our form fields, it's actually our fields. All right. So basically, this function is going to be triggered every single time that there is a change in our fields. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get rid of this. So we don't really need this, right? Yes, yes, we don't need this. So we're just going to check if this is empty or this is null, right? Yes. And okay, so we're going to check if this is empty or this is null. And then we're also going to check for our check value field. So so that we don't have clash of interest, I'm going to get rid of this. So we're also going to check for our check value field. So what we can do here is, let me get rid of this first. We're going to come right here, and then we're going to say if basically if the object, right? So if the object is called check value, then we want to check to see if the object is check value, and then we want to check if the value of that field is false. So if from fields, sorry, object, right? So if this is false, then we also want to set disable as true. Okay, so because the value of the state is changed asynchronously, we would want to make use of a use effect. All right, so our use effect is going to check for whenever there's a change in our field's input. That's why we're passing it here as a parameter. If we're to get rid of this, this is only going to be called once, and that's when the application starts. So we want to call this function whenever something changes within our fields. All right, so I'm going to save this right now, and we have an error here saying object. So I think this is objects, no objects. I'm going to save this right now. And now let's just head over to our browser. And now let's see what happens if I get this in here and I check this. You can see this is enabled. Uncheck this, this is disabled. Check this, this is enabled. Get rid of this, this is disabled. All right, so that's how we basically can, enable and disable the submit button based on what the user has entered. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to inspect elements. So I'm going to go over to our console. So in our console here, let me just let me clear this right now. And then I'm going to scroll down. If I hit the submit button, you can see here that the value, the name, the email, the comments, and then the chat value are all being passed down here as parameters. So we're going to pass these parameters down to our action. So in our create guest form here, we are going to pass those parameters down to our action here. And right here, I'm going to call our dispatch, and our dispatch is going to call. But before this, let me just get rid of this. And let me first of all import. Okay, we already have our use dispatch and our use selector here. So let me create an instance of our dispatch function here. So use dispatch, right? So our dispatch does our use dispatch. Then we can then call our dispatch function here. So I'm going to call our dispatch, and for our dispatch, we're going to call our create guest entry action, and our create guest entry action is going to take our fields. Okay, so I'm just going to save this right now. And so what we expect is we have an error here saying token is not defined in our HTTP service. So let's just head back to our HTTP service online 7639. So, okay, yeah, that's true. So let's pass token here. Now let's save that. Okay, so now let's get back over to our create guest form. And now what we expect is once we hit the submit button, all right, our guest entry action would take this, all right, and then it would call our create guest entry service. Our create guest entry service will then pass in our credentials, and then we get a response, and then whatever is our response, we dispatch certain actions towards our response. All right. So now let's just let's go back to our create guest form, right, and then head over to our browser. Okay, so now let's try submitting this form to see what happens. And then we just do this again. All right, and now let me clear this. So we agree, right? And then we hit submit button. And here we have an error. So what exactly is our error this time around? You can see here it says uncode type error class constructor HTTP cannot be invoked without the new. And that is because we forgot to make use of the new keyword. when we're actually calling our class. So my bad. Here, this is actually a class, so this should come with a new keyword. And now let's just head back to our browser, refresh this, and then I'm just going to clear this right now. All right, so let's do that again. So let's just get anything in our comments, and then I'm going to check this, clear this too, hit the submit button, and yep, I expected this. Of course, you can see here that we are having a cause error. So from origin has been blocked by cause policy. Response to amplified request does not pass access. All right. So in order for us to be able to fix this cause error, what we're going to do now is we're going to head over to our API. And so to set up our cause, we have to head straight to the documentation. So I'm going to go PHP Slim v4 cause error cookbook. All right. And then let's see. Let me see this. This is what I'm looking for. No, not okay. So let me see this now. Open link in new tab. Yes. So change this to version 4. So let me search cause. Setting up cause. All right. So this is exactly what I was looking for. So I'm going to copy this right now. And then in our middleware, I'm going to have to paste this in here. Okay, so I'm also going to change this to allow for all. Of course, on a live server, when you are deploying applications, you shouldn't allow origin to be all except if it's a public API. All right, so after we have done this, the next thing we want to do is we are going to set pre-flight. All right, so we're going to set pre-flight request. Okay, so for PHP Slim version 4, one of the things I noticed is if we don't set pre-flight request, the cause error just would not go away. All right, so basically pre-flight requests are simply a way of letting the browser know what he should expect before they come. So we're going to set options pre-flight requests. If you like to read more about pre-flight requests, I'll definitely drop a link below this video talking about MDN's documentation on pre-flight request. Okay, so basically you can see it's going to look like this. So this is an allow additional pre-flight request. Allow pre-flight request due to the behavior of browsers when sending a request. You must add the options method. Read about pre-flight. Okay, so yes, so let's just head back here and then let's begin setting up our pre-flight request. So I'm going to go over to routes, and here we're going to set pre-flight requests for each and every single route here. And then not to worry, I'm going to show you a much better way of doing things so that you don't have to go through the stress. So this is going to be a function. So basically we just declare the route, then we'll call our server request interface, yes, which is our request, and then our response interface, not response, which is our response. And I'd like this to be on a new line. And this is a type of our response interface. And then what we just do here is we have this wrapped around, and then we would return the response. Okay, so I'm going to copy this because let me just drop a comment here saying allow for pre-flight requests. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this right now, and then for view guest, I'm going to call view, and then for edit guest, I'm going to call here. So we're going to change edit guest. Okay, so let's just add delete guest, and we are expecting a parameter here. So let me call this delete guest, and then login here we would also add the same here. So login options, and then author register. If we head back over to our browser after we must have saved this, let's just get back here, and now I'd like to just refresh this and clear this, then clear this, and now let's just test that again. And you would expect that this should work because that is according to documentation. So if I hit here, you're still going to see a cause error. All right. And the reason why this cause error is popping up is because we are using a JWT package here. So if I head back to, okay, I think head back to our middleware, you're going to see we're using tupolar JWT package. All right. And for some reason, the tupolar JWT package doesn't work pretty well with PHP Slim's cause middleware when you add it here. Okay, so this tupolar package has functions like before and after, but if you added the before here, all right, and then you try to do something here after the before, it will still not work. And just to prove to you that this is an issue with the routes that the JWT is handling. If I were to, let's see, let me head back over here and then just change this to auth, right? auth/login, right? Yes. And now let's just head back here and let me reload this. Oh, yes, let me reload this. And now if I just to show you guys, if I submit this, we're still getting a cause issue. This, okay, let me empty cache and hard reload. So let's try that again. And we're still getting a cause error. So let me see. Let's get rid of this. Save that. Empty cache and hard reload. And then clear this now. Clear this. Agree to the terms. Submit. And yep, you can see here that we are actually having a 400 error. And this 400 error is, let's see. Let me go to network. And then here, you can see that it is setting our headers. It's also setting our access control allow origin. And then if I head over to our response, you can see this is because password must not be empty. So basically for login, we're using both the email, which is present, but the password is absent. So our validation rule has flagged this for us. Okay, so you can see basically that this is caused by the Tupola package. So there's a workaround to this. The workaround I found, since every single request that has been made to our application is handled right within our index.php. So every single thing goes in here. So basically what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set our calls in our index.php. So basically before anything ever happens within our application, it will set our calls on a global scale. Okay, so what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to say if is set. So basically if our HTTP origin is set, so yeah, our $_server HTTP origin is set. So if this is set, we want to allow from any origin. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to call PHP header function, and here I'm going to have our access control allow origin, and here we want to ensure that we are only allowing our origin as the server. And I think I did make a mistake here, so just to avoid this, this is supposed to be this. So here HTTP origin, or you could decide to still use all, whichever one still works just fine. And then why are we okay here? So yep, and then we also want to set our header for our credentials. So here I'm going to call access control allow credentials, and here will be true. And then we are then going to check to see if our request method, right, has options in it. Then if our request method is an option type, then we are going to check to see if our HTTP access control request method is present. So if it's set request method, and then we will now call our access control allow method. So basically the methods that we want to allow within this application. So for this, we are basically allowing every single method. So access control allow methods. And for this, we'll call get, post, put, and delete. And then of course options. So after setting the allow methods, we are also going to set our request headers. So in here, if it is also set, which is control request headers, so HTTP access control request headers. Yes, so here then we will now set our header, and this is going to be our access control allow headers, and right here we will then have our server HTTP access control request headers. Okay, then we're going to save this right now, and if we head back over to our application, but let me change this to let me change this back to create guest. Okay. And let's see what happens now. I check here and now I hit this. You're going to see right now that we no longer have the cause error any longer. Instead, we have the 401 error, which is usually a sign that the user is not authenticated. So The beautiful thing about this also is that by setting this in an index.php, it can allow for us to remove all our preflights. Of course, we could just set a single regular expression to handle our preflight actions, but it allows for us to get rid of all our preflights and then keeps things minimal. So let me get rid of these two and then this two. And start about that. Yes. So let's try that again. So let me do this empty cache and hard reload. And then if I scroll down here, then I check I agree, submit, you're still going to see that we are getting the same 401 error. Okay, so this video is getting really long. I think I'm going to stop this video here. And in the next video, we are going to look at, because basically you can see right now that because the user is not authenticated, you cannot access this route. So we're going to look at creating a login, our register, and then doing all other CRUD operations for this application.